So my background is in banking, but it's hard to deny that a lot of employers, specifically private equity firms, look to hire consultants when they're hiring associates or post-MBA positions. In truth, consultants and bankers have a lot in common. They both are prepared to work hard, often come from some of the top schools, and want to keep a lot of their options open as it comes to future career choices. And one thing I've noticed is, aside from the most prestigious schools, the path that you pick is often determined by the school that you went to. From my observation, some schools recruit a lot better for finance or for consulting, and that in turn is going to influence a lot of the decision you make coming out of school. So as a follow-up to our investment banking target school list, we are going to break down which schools recruit the best for consulting. And specifically, we're going to look at North America, and specifically, we're going to look only at MBB. MBB being the top 3 management consulting firms in McKinsey, BCG, and Bain. These firms tend to consistently attract the top talent, as well as charge their clients more fees, and generally have better exit opportunities. So to arrive at this dataset, we scraped all of LinkedIn globally, specifically looking for people who worked at MBB. And this first screen was all employees. It was 95,000 entries that spanned every country. We're really only interested in the target schools today, so we only looked at people who worked at one of these firms between 2014 and 2020. Next, we screened for only North American consultants. We only looked at people in the US and Canada, and only took people with junior or mid-level titles, which brought us to about 8,000 people. And lastly, we screened just for undergraduates, which brought us to about 3,000 candidates. Now, we did this because it gets a lot messier if you try to introduce people with MBAs or master's degrees or philosophy PhDs. So we just wanted to look at the undergraduate college level. And this actually took out a lot of people, but we think that it's the most representative for what we're trying to do. We finally then cut and sort the data, and it gave us a pretty clear answer for who the 2 best schools were when it came to consulting. That would be Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania. These 2 schools both had about 200 hires over the past 7 years, which is about 2 times as much as the next target schools. I think it's pretty safe to say that Harvard and Penn are the absolute best when it comes to undergraduate careers in business. They place a ton of people into banking, directly into the buy side, and it's pretty clear that they crush MBB consulting as well. The next crop of schools I would all consider targets. We set the cutoff at about 80 hires, which is between 10 and 15 hires every single year into MBB. This category includes Michigan, Yale, Stanford, Duke. These are all very traditionally good schools, and it's no surprise that they place very well. I think this category also reaffirms the notion that lots of traditionally prestigious schools will thrive in consulting. In contrast, Duke, MIT, and Stanford really don't do quite as well in banking. The next category we defined as weaker targets. This is between 50 and 80 hires over the data set, which is about 7 to 10 hires every single year. At that 50 hire mark, or around there, that means you're hiring maybe 7 or 8 people into all the MBB firms every single year, which means 2 or 3 people into every firm. So that really means you have to be kind of the top of your class. It means you have to be very involved in order to stand out and get attention from these firms. I think at this level, you can also start to see how some schools have much stronger relationships with a given firm, and they might lack relationships elsewhere. USC, for example, has virtually no presence at McKinsey relative to the other 2 firms. We also included the McKinsey percentage in this data table with the belief that they probably are the best overall firm, but looking at the data, it doesn't actually tell us that much. I don't think there's any really big takeaways we can take from it. In terms of how the data tapers off, there's a couple of schools that have between 10 and 15 hires, including schools like Southern Methodist and Williams. But below this level, there are many schools with no MBB hires. So I think if your focus is to break into a top consulting firm, you kind of have to go to one of these top 30 to 40 schools. So due to popular demand, we're going to show another cut of this table. We are going to show this kind of per capita. So we're going to take all of the hires that we just looked at, and then we're going to divide by the overall student population. Now, I'll make a disclaimer. I don't think this is quite as accurate as the first table. I think it over-indexes to small schools. I think there's a lot of value in going to a big school because that means you have a really big alumni base, lots of people to network with, and it's more beneficial for firms to visit a big school in terms of expected value from their hiring. I also think it's hard to accurately get a denominator for this calculation because a lot of schools are going to have really big medical and science populations, making it difficult to isolate for who's really going into consulting. But nevertheless, here is the data, and unsurprisingly, it helps a lot of the small liberal arts colleges that still consistently send a couple of people into MBB every single year and are very small when it comes to student population. Harvard's dominance becomes even more apparent because they have a relatively small school size and they kind of leave Penn in the dust when it comes to this calculation. Most of the target schools are kind of in the same couple of rankings, but it really does help liberal arts colleges like Claremont McKenna, as well as Davidson, Williams, and Amherst. So I get a question a lot of whether you should go to one of these schools or one of the larger schools. And honestly, I think if you have a strong preference for either, you should go with that preference because I don't think there's substantially a big difference when you think about the per capita effectiveness of your school. When you compare this list to the investment banking list, I think you can see some big discrepancies, mostly coming from schools that tend to have strong accounting and finance programs. This includes schools like NYU, Georgetown, Boston College, and my alma mater, Ivy, that do much better in finance as opposed to consulting. So it's no surprise why so many people from these schools treat their schools like investment banking factories, with NYU topping the list for banking but not even being on this consulting list. I do think that finance has a higher initial technical requirement to get into the job. You can just be a really smart person that is quick at solving problems and break into consulting. But finance often requires months or years of study, and that allows schools with really good finance and business programs to do relatively better. So I hope this video will help you decide which school to go to or brag to your friends about how you went to a better school than them. If you're a consultant trying to break into private equity, you should check out our private equity recruiting course, which I think is the best on the market. We've helped candidates from around the world break into the top private equity firms and learn all the technical skills they need to know for the interview. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.